to talk about the Pioneer Island assessment that the Business Success Center recently completed. And I'd like to start with some introductions of the Business Success Center. First, we have Kim Biederman. Next, we have Brian Lilly. And then we have Tim Short. They'll be up here shortly to talk about their study. But I also wanted to remind the Planning Commission, RDA, and the Council what else has been going on around Pioneer Island, just to bring everybody up to date on a few of those things. Some of the things you already know. Best Western Hotel opened in 2013. Seems to be going very well for the downtown and the redevelopment of the riverfront. The Riverwalk development continues. In fact, we got good news just today that the State of Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources is giving us more grant money for another project on the South Shore to take it farther to the east across the Geldwin property to get it over to the dockside. So that's another piece of good news. Code enforcement is an issue both at the Pioneer and the Buckstaff property. The city attorney has filed the necessary papers to compel some code enforcement, and that'll be coming up in the near future. TID number 20, I talked about that probably 6 months ago when we were talking about the South Shore. That's still in a decrement. We're going to be looking at whether we need to reestablish that base. We'll be looking at that later this year, but we are about $3.5 or $4 million in the hole in that particular TIF district, so that is not a good financial situation. Lastly, we got two other redevelopment opportunities. The Morgan District, which is the old Geldwin property that some local developers have purchased, and you've seen the deconstruction they've been doing, and they are working on plans for the future redevelopment of that site. And then across the river, the Marion Road area, you can see the next phase of that development under construction. We're working with other people potentially for other redevelopment to that site. So things are looking pretty good for the redevelopment of the Marion Road area. But taking us back to the Pioneer, we've seen a lot of deterioration over the years, and we've seen the value decline. And we were looking at different things that we could do to help spur that redevelopment. That's a high priority here in the city of Oshkosh. And I think that's City Council, the Plan Commission, the RDA all share that concern. That's why Business Success Center was retained to take a look at what we could do to help spur that redevelopment. And just to keep things going, I'll turn it over to Kim and Brian and Tim, and then we'll tie it up here at the end, and we'll try to keep it relatively short since we had an unusually long Plan Commission meeting. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Alan. My name is Kim Biederman. I'm the Outreach Program Manager for UW Oshkosh's Business Success Center. If you're not familiar with the Business Success Center, what we do is we make connections between the campus and the community. And we do this by reaching out to businesses and organizations who may have some certain area. A lot of times they reach out to us, actually. And they may have a need, whatever that may be. And we try to find the appropriate faculty or staff who can assist with those needs. So in this case, Alan approached us sometime late in 2013 asking about the Pioneer property and if we could assist in some research for the Pioneer property. So just in way of background, what they really approached us with is, saying we'd like to see something happen with the Pioneer property and what can happen here. So they worked with us, or they contracted with us really to say, can you do some research and find out what have other communities done? What are some potential uses for this property? So in way of background, there are a lot of things that we knew coming into it. We knew that the main island property has been idle. The marina is still being used, but it's continuing to decline in condition, and it's not being used really like it could be. We know that it's about 15 acres in size, and that the city is planning on developing the Riverwalk around the island. So what can we do to optimize this use, especially in light of some of the great things that are happening around Oshkosh and some potentials that are happening on the south side? It's currently owned by Decade Properties. There is a lot of information in Appendix 2 toward the back of the packets about Decade Properties. They have properties mainly, I believe, possibly exclusively in Wisconsin and Florida, from what we saw in our research. Pioneer Marina opened in 1965. The hotel closed around 2005. And as I said before, the marina has stayed open, but the rentals have declined significantly. The city of Oshkosh, as Alan had mentioned before, has lost valuable tax revenue, and this is really a property that could be used. So the main objective of this project is to provide an initial assessment of options for redeveloping this property for the benefit of the city, its residents, its businesses, and its visitors, and to help the city of Oshkosh drive action with the current property owners. This was done mainly through secondary research, and the secondary research that we did was looking at what other communities have done to address vacant or underutilized waterfront property. So we looked at 11 communities. They really had a varying degree of size, diverse areas, and diverse uses. As you can see, a majority are in the Midwest, as was the intent, similar climate, similar geography. But we also did look outside as well. We looked at Ocean City, New Jersey, and we also explored some other communities. However, a lot of what we were finding in those other communities were process-driven as opposed to actually having plans. So those were not included in here. And I'm going to turn it over to Tim now to talk about, as one of the consultants on this project, to talk about some of the factors we looked at when evaluating these properties.
Thank you, Kim. My presentation, please. Good evening, I guess now. I was thinking it was going to be good afternoon. My name is Tim Short, and I will do my best to keep it short, but I will tell you that's probably not necessarily in my nature. I spent a little over 30 years at Kimberly-Clark and retired a couple of years ago and enjoyed a good career and was very happy to move on. So we've worked with the university on several different projects through the Business Success Center. So I'm going to jump right in here. You've all, I think, had a presentation ahead of time, so I really probably won't go through all of the details of each community unless there's interest, and I'll be happy to do that. There's details in the appendix, and there's some summaries and some key learnings. And as Kim mentioned, not only were these very diverse communities, even though they were all waterfront, they were all mostly in the Midwest. Some of the processes they used, there were some key takeaways that I think that are important to consider as we're looking at taking what I think is one of the most potentially beautiful and valuable pieces of property in the area. As a person who lives on Lake Winnebago, for years we used to come up here with boats and things, and it's a shame to see what's happened to the whole Pioneer Island, quite frankly. But a lot of different things. There's some of these examples that you saw where the communities owned the land, so they had complete control and could do what they wanted. There's others where private developers came in, were motivated, had their own plans, worked with the city to get the approvals, and things went quickly. And there's others where, kind of like here, where the communities are very involved in trying to put together a comprehensive plan for what the property can be, but are somewhat dependent upon the current owners to move forward and to be motivated to do something. And that's very much the case here, because we've talked to the one of the principals at Decade Property. Really nice guy, was very interested in the city doing this, but had absolutely no commitment whatsoever that he was going to do anything based on this. You know, he said, we've got a lot of priorities. I was very happy to see in the paper, and having worked with Alan and Mark and Darren and company, to see that the city is moving forward and trying to encourage them to at least keep that property in line with what the zoning is and what the ordinances are with some of the use they're doing. Because we actually went on there last summer. We went on to take a look at the condition. We went with one of the restaurateurs here to see, as we were looking at some of these options, if there would be appeal. Because we know when the marina was operating, the hotel and the tiki bar, that place was really, really vibrant, especially during boating season. So there was some interest to see. And got there, and there's trees growing out of the swimming pool, and things are in just a real state of disarray. So there wasn't any short-term opportunities that anybody was even interested in talking to the current owner. So I'm talking about all this because I think there's a couple of really key elements here. One is that I think that looking at all these options helps put some priorities around some things to consider as a city, but it's going to be really, really important to either get Decades motivated to sell the property to another investor who would be wanting to work with the city, or hopefully it becomes a bigger priority in their mind so that the city can work with them to take that land and make it back into something really, I think, really valuable and appealing to the whole city, as well as to bring tourists in. So there, I've rambled for quite some time. I don't know if you've seen this. We can run through these real quickly, and you can look at each city if you're interested, or we can go back and I can summarize kind of what some of the key takeaways were from what we've learned from all of these various communities, and then really talk about some of the options that we put together and how we kind of evaluated those as we're looking at some of those considerations. So, you guys, if you've seen this, I'll be glad to summarize at the end here.
Why don't you summarize? And,
Okay.
I think there's some concurrent themes that are in all of them.
There's differences in terms of the situation, but there are some themes that make a lot of sense. So if we get back here and we talk, yes.
I think that's a good idea. I agree with that. One other thing, if community had a non-motivated party involved, any insight you can give us, particularly on how that community move forward? Yeah,
and that's a very good question. I think like the city of Ashland, Wisconsin, they had a lot of incredibly valuable and appealing waterfront along Lake Superior. And they really spent a lot of time. They got consultants involved and put a really comprehensive plan together, but it really hasn't gone anywhere because some of that land is owned by individual developers. I think some of the price tags of doing some of that work is really high. They hadn't really put together the financial funding strategy at the same time. They put together the redevelopment strategy. So I think different here is even though what we were looking at was the island and the marina, I think what we're coming to the conclusion, we'll talk about this later, is that you really need to look at that entire block that goes all the way down, includes, what is it, the Buck, is that Buck? And all the way down to Main Street, because I think, not that everything would get done at once, but a plan with kind of an idea of how that whole property would be used would be a really, really important aspect of this. But others, to your point, I think where a private developer came in and had a plan and was motivated or was sold on a piece of it, that's where progress gets made quickly. And you kind of got your hands tied if you don't control, the use of that land. So it's a tough situation. And I think that we can get through here because there were some really interesting and I think valuable learnings in terms of the things that a lot of these communities did that made sense. So here, if we look at this summary, and again, the second bullet point is so critical because it's assuming that current ownership does cooperate in this process. So assuming that's the case, the city does own a piece of, well, I don't even know who owns the land. Everybody's arguing who owns the land. A bank owns it or the Buckstaff. But there's varying degrees of motivation, I think, behind a lot of that property. But it does make sense to look at that entire property in whole so that whole comprehensive plan can be put together. So as you're putting infrastructure in place, whether that's transportation, whether that's roads, and whether that's bike and walking paths for the safety of the users of that land, that those things are being considered so they're not having to be redone as you go forward. So this talks about that whole area that we think should be included in that planning process. The things that where we saw the most positive and I think the most community support is where there was a lot of community involvement. The stakeholders, they went to a broad group of stakeholders. So you have often as a steering committee or it's a redevelopment commission that's leading this, but they bring in community input. They bring in an outside, whether it's a urban planner type organization. The ones that were most successful brought in a financial person, kind of a funding strategist, if you will, to talk about when will we need funds and how can we get funds and how can we be creative. A lot of these people were able to get several $1 million just to go through the planning process through state and federal funding, so that they, and so they have folks out there that were writing grants and really right from the start looking after that financial aspect to help. It helps motivate the developers as well as the community, right? Because there's some funds to really get this thing kick-started. So, please.
Just a question. You're referring to the Kenosha example here. It says that they got $2.5 million of state and
That's
federal
one
funding.
of them did, yeah.
But in that instance, the city itself owned that
Right.
land. Is that the case to get funding? The city has to be the owner?
Based on our research, I don't think there is any one pattern that has to follow. I think that probably helped. The city used it and claimed it for city money, but there were other places where they were able to. Now it's different. I mean, like in East Chicago, Indiana, they were able to get funding. Now I know that's a different state. It's just that a lot of these folks really took that into account. Racine was a different one because Racine got everybody's involved. The city owns some of that property, but then S.C. Johnson made this a pet project, if you will, the company and the Johnson family. And they went quickly, they made decisions, they got funding, and things started happening. And so that's why it's really hard to say there's no cookie cutter solution, because everyone's a little bit different, but there's always some driving motivator that helps these things move forward. Up in Washington Island, in Door County, that was the town owned that, and that was really the funding. I mean, that's the source of most of their funds coming in, right? People coming over on the ferry, bringing tourists over, and so they went out looking for funds. But that is, the municipality said, we really have to fix this, or we're going to lose basically the goose that lays the golden egg with all the people coming if it isn't safe and if it isn't visually appealing. So each one had its own set of. I mean, I wish there were a real clear-cut solution or a path forward, but. I think what we saw here there's some elements that we can pull out of this that I think require some consideration as you're going forward. But at the end of the day, it gets right back to making sure that we either get the current owners to sell to somebody who does want to work with the city to do this, or at some point this rises up on their priority list so that this becomes an area that they want to reinvest. I mean, they said, I think it was in late 2013, it was in the Milwaukee paper, they said, well, we have absolutely no plans to do anything at Pioneer Island and Oshkosh until the economy picks up and the demand is there to support it. Well, that's really, really one of those blanket statements that allows them to not do anything for as long as they want to not do anything, is my assessment of that. So if we keep moving, there were some, again, we asked the question, there were some examples where it was very successful, where it was a public sector only. There was those with just private investors, and there's some that are a combination of both. There's different impacts that those have, and you'll see on some of our options, and we just put a list of options together so we could do some assessment. Those that are the public sector owning and become public land and things, they're great for the community. They're not so good for tax revenue and for income sources and for job creation to a large extent for the area. So we have to weigh all those things out. But I think, again, it's more about what the community rallies around, what the plan comes together, and everybody supporting it is more important probably than who is owning or driving each piece of that. One thing we saw where it was successful is that these communities set some very specific priorities and goals for the property. They were very clear, is this for our local residents? Is it for private use? It's either residential or office space or retail space. Do we really want to use this as a tourist attraction so we can bring money in to the city and encourage people to come in and visit and stay and spend their money? Can it help us with the other surrounding businesses who also will benefit from having that traffic coming into the area? So really setting some of those objectives. What are we really trying to accomplish? The tax revenue and the economic and employment desires that we'd have for the property would be an important thing to consider. I think the marina is an incredibly underutilized asset. I mean, when I think back when I moved into the valley in the early 80s, that was a booming place. I mean, they even had float planes, and the place was, and it had the restaurant and bar next door, so it was people coming in, boaters coming in from the whole system to take advantage and enjoy the area and things. And I think the marina being on the water like it is a really, really critical anchor for that space if it gets rebuilt. Yes.
In looking at your comparables, certainly a lot of them had this similar environmental challenges as our parcels do and our connections do, but did you have any with the same railroad control and state?
No, I mean, we did do it in East Chicago. That used to be really industrial, but that is such a broad area that they can work around that, right? So, I mean, they have to watch the safety aspects of that, but it isn't like cutting right through the center. But I mean, we talked a lot about that in terms of pedestrian bridges and things like that, and while the railroad has every plan to continue being utilized, it's not like the trains are running every 30 minutes or something. So it never seemed to be a big problem when the Pioneer was in there. And then, I mean, we used to come down and we'd rent that for business meetings all the time because it felt like you were really getting away and you're 10 miles down the road, but you'd bring your teams over here and spend the night, and you'd have restaurants, we'd go to the granary and all those things. And I don't ever remember anybody being too concerned about the trains.
We've had some issues. When I talk to residential developers, that comes up.
Oh, for residential, that could be a very different
Stigma on that.
that could be a different issue.
Traffic's up by the trains and that.
If the traffic is
More
up,
yeah,
yeah,
it's up. It's, if you live on that side of town, you know it. It's hard to go through.
yeah.
It's big.
And there's not enough land to go up above or down below. I mean, you're going to deal with the railroad crossing, and yeah. So I think the last part there just is not to lose sight of that, as I mentioned before, just having those objectives and the financial impact and understanding both in terms of putting the plan in place, but then setting some objectives so developers get excited, assuming we have a motivated developer. The desired end use for the property, for the entire property, we talked about that. I think even though it could be a 20-year plan until the whole square is developed, kind of having a vision for what that could be makes a lot of sense so that you can really figure out how those pieces fit together and how the infrastructure needs to be developed to help support that. It is, as we found looking at this, it is very uniquely designed to offer multiple appeals. Now that the Best Western is downtown, and the hope is that the Best Western stimulates the convention center and a lot more activity there, having something over here that appeals to families, so if people are coming in for a business reason, they can bring their families and have it somewhere else close by to go. There's just a lot of potential synergies that could work, but again, having some some thoughts about how that works, and can it be made to work for closer to 12 months a year rather than 6 or 7 months a year if it's just about the water part. So those are things to consider. As we said, because the island and marina are privately owned, some of the options may be limited or impossible to execute in the short term. We talked about the infrastructure things, traffic, parking, and then the role the city plays in owning, financing, operating, or directing the land use. Again, it would be hard-pressed for me to suggest that you spend a bunch of money to put this plan together if this whole issue of current ownership isn't sorted to a certain extent, because you could spend a lot of time and effort, have the best plan of any of these plans we've ever looked at, but if there is no motivation by the current owner, unless there's a way to force him to give up that land, he seems to be holding the cards in that regard. So we need to force him to act. By the same token, we need to keep relatively in pretty good relationships so that, in fact, he doesn't dig his feet in and continue on the path he's been on for the last 10 years. So one of the things we were asked to do then is look at a bunch of options. And so what we did is we tried to look at a wide array of options. And you can rest assured that none of them probably would be what would ultimately be executed. But the idea was to get a broad range of potential uses of that property and see how it would impact the appeal. So I think we can look at this. These are just some of the themes. You can look at that on your own. I think what's important is how did we evaluate that so we could take a look? Because there is one chart in here that kind of compares all those. But we put together 18 criteria, and we tried to use red, yellow, green to the extent we can. Green is good, yellow is not too bad, and red is the worst option. Here in the primary use of the land with 6 categories. It was public use, like Menominee Park as an example, I guess. Several commercial use, whether it's hospitality, whether it's retail, or whether it's office space, residential use, and some mixed uses. The second area was the benefit to the city, and that was really all about tax revenue. The third is the cost to the city, and there are a couple pieces. One is the land acquisition cost. If you don't need to make any acquisitions, that's great. If you have moderate costs because of infrastructure investments and things that are required to make the land usable, that we said was kind of yellow. And if there's a high cost, which would include having to buy land and do the infrastructure, that would get a red color. The next one is more just to get characterizing the type of involvement and investment, public only, the city, public and private partnership, or private sector only. And then what's the ongoing requirement from the city? I mean, are you going to have to manage it? Are you going to have to maintain it? Or is it really going to be just collect the annual property taxes, which would be ideal? So you can see that. Then we looked at job creation. Does it create jobs? So it's green if it creates a lot of jobs. It's yellow if it creates a significant number. And then if there's very few jobs, we called it red. The pay level, not only is it creating jobs, but are they decent jobs? Are they jobs that support families? So you can see the same thing here. We just arbitrarily, not totally arbitrarily, but we just put some ranges in. Then we tried to characterize these things as a catalyst for economic development in the surrounding area, for the downtown area and all along the river. So again, it's if it's a high impact, it was going to be positive, and some of these are very subjective, but some of them it makes sense. Then we looked at the target audience, and this was the 4 different groups. For the city and community residents, is it appealing for them? Did they benefit from that? Tourist visitors, does it bring people in? Because there's a lot of appeal if we can bring people in. I mean, it is Event City, and you've had a lot of people here the last week with that Country USA, and I think Rock USA is right on its heels, and EAA is right on its heels. So anything that continues that trend of bringing people into the downtown area, I think, is very good. Boaters, both from whether they're renting the marina or they're just coming in from the system and having it as a destination. And then local businesses, is their opportunity to develop more businesses because of the use of that land. The next thing we looked at was the timing to execute, and this is more about when the current owners or whoever owns that property makes those decisions and starts. But you can see if it's a short, medium, or long-term type of plan. What's the complexity? So if there's like a single developer coming in, has a plan for the entire area, that would be a very simple and outstanding plan. Chances are it's going to take multiple partners, especially if we're looking at the entire block of property, including Buckstaff all the way up to Maine and across to the island. And then perceived probability of success, again, very subjective, but depending on the type of thing, some of them, if somebody builds if Oshkosh Corporation decides to put their corporate headquarters in an office building on the island, chances are it's pretty high probability of success because they've been around for a long time, and I don't think they have any intention of going anywhere. If it's a thing with a farmer's market kind of thing, and I'm only using that as an example because that's not even one of the considerations, that's a little more dependent upon a lot of people being involved and wanting to be make it successful. So the point was we looked at a lot of different things, and so on the left side in that first column, we've got kind of the themes of the various potential uses for the land that we identified, and then we go across based on those criteria. And green is good. A lot of red is problematic. I think that the land use and the type of investment is probably more just a classification than it is a decision maker, because I think the other columns are important. I think if you look at the fourth column over, the second colored column, the cost to the city, and the one beside it, the tax revenue, the green ones towards the top tend to be private developer investments. You got apartments, which bars, condominiums, hotel, restaurant, kind of the former use, and office building. Those things tend to be less cost to the city and more continuous revenue, because if you get a lot of people living there, moving in and out, and room taxes and things. So here, I don't know if you have had a chance. I think this is one, if you want to just look at that, I can make some overall comments about what we took away from that, and some general observations on the next slide, or if there's any questions about any of those options listed. I don't want to skip over it too quickly. By the same token, if you've looked at it, I mean, some of them are a little more realistic than others. Some of them tend to be more year-round type uses versus probably good weather type uses, or at least more regularly used all year long. Yes?
I understand the frustration in the property not being developed, but other than making it less objectionable visually, maybe more ready to develop, is it worth the time and effort to try to force the market on something that we don't control and work on property that's in play, like between the bridges?
I think because that is in play, I think that you don't want to take your eye off that ball, and a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? I mean, I think that this all started, and this started before some of that was even going on, but I just think that this is, I don't think that I would suggest the city spend a ton of money, but I do think that it's important to continue to put some polite pressure on the owners to make a decision one way or the other, because it is such a great piece of land. It has so much potential. Yes, you have a lot of other riverfront now that's under development and full steam ahead. I don't think you would want to prioritize this over some plans that are already in place. But I do, and this is me speaking, this isn't Alan or necessarily, but I do think I mean, like I said, I live on the lake. I know how much taxes I pay per square foot, and I got an idea. I didn't know. I don't think I know it to the dollar today, but how much tax the city is collecting from the current owners from that entire marina and island, and it's like, I feel like I'm getting ripped off because he's getting quite a bargain. And so it's almost like the assessment of that land, whether it's used or not, to me should be raised just so that there's, that it speaks to the value of waterfront property. I think that the current condition of that land, it's a bit of an eyesore. I think it's a potential safety hazard for kids or people who don't necessarily listen to the do not trespass signs. There's a lot of that foundation is just kind of laying there from the old hotel. The current standing structure is falling apart, and I'm sure that there's people can get in there without too much difficulty. That pool is just a big hole in the ground of cement. I think there's some safety issues, and there's certainly some for those people who are using. And in the summer, it's a ton of people who are using the Lake Winnebago and going down the river and using the lake system. I mean, it's not really a bad reflection, but it certainly seems to be a wasted piece of property. And it certainly doesn't look very appealing. People are going down past it to the south to Stretches Beach to hang out, or they're going north to a different way, or they're going down the river and nobody's stopping anymore. It used to be a destination. No, so to answer your question, I don't necessarily think it needs to be the number one priority, but I think the entire community feels that island, we've lost something. That used to be a pretty special place. And you can't force it. I totally agree that you can't force it, but what can the city do to at least keep that on the forefront and on the front burner to keep the dialogue going, to find out what the current developers' plans are? Because nobody's going to make an investment that they don't feel is going to give them a good return. That's common sense, and I don't care who owns the property, who the developer is, but I have to believe that there's probably some people who feel that there's some options that could be, that they could make a go of on that property if they were motivated to do so.
Well, but then it comes back to the market, correct? It's, you look at one of the themes is that all these cities, or many of these cities, had great plans, but a lot of them never even got out of the blocks, even though millions of dollars were spent. And why was Kenosha successful? Because it's a bedroom community of Chicago, and it spurred development. And you had the harbor. I mean, it's sort of like the Third Ward in Milwaukee. That was part of it was successful because you had people from Milwaukee that bought or from Chicago bought condominiums there because it was cheaper than keeping their boat in Burnham Harbor or whatever.
And it got them out of the city for the weekend or whatever.
You go to St. Paul, that's got all the money in the world with their redevelopment authority and their river terminal group or whatever. Yep. And they're really struggling. Yet on the other hand, I'm surprised that you didn't look at Minneapolis, that has phenomenal waterfront development on the river, or Duluth. I mean, what was able to move the ball there?
We didn't look at those. I'm not familiar to know, exactly. What we're trying to do is take some contained areas that had some of the same issues. And so I think they had a lot of individual developers that, Minneapolis is a booming city, right?
But you have that energy there, but they have a plan that the whole, that all the way up to past the Lowry Bridge is going to be residential on both sides of the river. And they just were able to close the last lock and dam, and it'll even further that. But there you have a lot more development and successful development than you do for instance, in St. Paul. One of their challenges is that you have a working river and a working railroad on both sides of the river. But it comes back to why the cities that were successful, what made them successful, and can we duplicate that?
Well, and then you got the other story. Take Sheboygan, which had an incredibly good plan. They had incredible motivation behind it. They executed the plan. The economy went south, and they ended up losing a bunch of tax revenue because the builders of that hotel had to sell it for less than the cost of the hotel. So now all of a sudden their tax base is down, the revenue they got from it, and and I think they're operating in a
The issue is our hands are really tied because there's an owner who doesn't want to, at present, does not want to work with us, does not want to sell. Legally, we can't do a whole lot. I think what we've talked about is we should at least get our ducks in the row and look at some scenarios. If he should say, I do want to develop, how do we want to help him? If he should sell, what do we do? Do we find developers? Do we as a city acquire the property? I think I'd like to get a plan put together with a lot of alternatives in anticipation of some scenarios that may happen with the developer. But we met with him, Alan, 3 years ago in fall, and he seemed willing at that point to talk with us, and then
But he was very clear that said he had a lot of other priorities.
a lot of other
Yeah.
priorities, and some of which he had some problems at that hotel in Clearwater. He doesn't live in the community, so he has really no emotional ties or attachment to the community, but
He'd be happy to sell, but he's not going to sell it for less than what he wants for it, which is more than what he paid for it, which is a fair amount of money.
as far as we can tell, he's not desperate for cash. If he were, he may want to sell.
Yeah.
End of the day, he's still a businessman, and money talks. And where we can, and I agree with what you were talking about earlier, not just about that one little island, it's about that whole area. So if we put the plan together to develop the area around him, he's gonna see, I can make money here. I can put in a development that's gonna make it. So I think the important part, and this goes back to a little bit what you're saying, David, I don't think we can stop. We still have to focus on the areas we have between the bridges that we control, but we also can control that other area that's around the Pioneer Inn and start to put together a plan and target what we want to have there as far as businesses or whatever it is. Go target that and show the community, the developing community, that we're serious about what we're going to do. Everybody hides around, well, it's not market. I mean, it's the market's bad and stuff. Well, if you wait until the market's good, you're behind the ball.
That's right.
You're never going to catch up because everybody else has already planned and are ready for when the market comes back. If we can show developers, and you do this by having successful little projects. You get one here, you get one here, you get one here, all of a sudden they start looking at it, well, geez, those are successful, they're making money. The occupancy up on the Marion Road is 100%. He puts up another place, it becomes 100%. Now you got a couple successful wins. You've got, a couple restaurants that have been put in place. Now you got a downtown hotel that seems to be successful. Developed all the river walk and stuff that's going on. And now it starts to draw businessmen in that want to make and develop the property. So I'm saying, yes, we may not control the Pioneer, and we should continue to do what we need to do. Code enforcement, condemn the buildings if they're safety issues, but continue to have that dialogue with them. At the same time, start to put together all the plan that's going around here, like you had talked about that entire block. And then show them that we're serious. And a businessman at the end of the day, he's there to make money. He doesn't care how he does it. He's going to make money. Whether he can sell the property and make money, whether he develops it, he's going to make money. That's what they're going to look for at the end.
I couldn't agree with you more. Some of the general observations, when you look at that grid, the tax revenue, the cost to the city, and job creation are rated the highest with these private sector opportunities that we identified, things like hotel, restaurant, and office building or apartments and condos. Local resident appeal to the most people are with the public ownership because that's more parks and local usage. The complexity of options has so many variables, it makes it very difficult to make that a differentiator. I think it's just something to think about. And then the timing of execution is so dependent upon the current owner and his plans or finding interested partners if he's willing to sell. So those are tough to do. Some things that I think the city should do, if I realize there are other priorities. I know there's a lot of other development going on, but I would continue the dialogue because today he hasn't even, at least unless he's recently told us, Alan or Steve, he has not even said if this is back on his radar screen at all. I mean, he's very comfortable sitting. I think he's making enough money elsewhere that he's making enough money on the marina probably to be about break even, and he's making enough money on all the other properties that the property taxes aren't killing him, and so he's fine just sitting, is what it feels like to me. So where does this fit in his overall plans or priorities? What can the city do with him or for him to help encourage the redevelopment? I think we've already done this next couple things, address the maintenance issues where we've at least contacted him and said that needs to be dealt with, address the use of land to make sure it's consistent with the current zoning, and then work to prevent further deterioration of property value there. I personally think that putting a little more paint on him from tax assessment, I know it's probably not as easy as it is for me to sit here and say that, but I think that would be something to be considered as well. If the city were to obtain opportunity to facilitate the redevelopment, if he would say he'd like to partner with the city to put this whole plan together to see what those options are, then I think the second section here in the middle of the page, establishing a steering team for the redevelopment with a budget and specific objectives. I would get some external consultant or subject matter experts to assist in the process. This Vanderwall and Associates and Smith Group were two firms that were used by several communities here in the Midwest. I know very little or nothing about them other than what we read in that research, but they're urban planning type groups that seem to be fairly established here in this area of the country. I think a funding plan, and again, if there's any opportunity to even get funding to do the planning process, then it's a win-win, right? You can get some plans put in place without costing the city a bunch of money, which would be a difficult thing to justify. And I think that if the planning process, then it could really get into this list of options and put together more specific plans on what an ideal entire block we're talking about. The thing we saw with a lot of these is getting community input early and often so that at least they have an opportunity to check in, they can provide their input is important. And then to the extent that the existing developer or owner is willing to sell, engaging with another developer who is motivated and sees the potential or wants to get involved in this would be a really good thing sooner rather than later. So that's kind of what the assessment, and we spent a lot of time. It's one of those things that there's a lot of really great stuff going on in Oshkosh, and that with the law along the river and that redevelopment, that's terrific. I just continue to believe that that's kind of a piece of property that someday will once again be a shining star on the city. I think if the right folks come in and make it happen, it's just such a great location. There's so many people between the lake and the river. It's got a lot of visual appeal, and it's got a lot of aquatic appeal. Anybody that's on boats or so. I don't know if there's questions for Brian or Kim or Alan or anybody else. Yeah.
What would you like to see?
Well, when we talked a lot about this, I really believe having something that is a destination for people. I mean, now I'm torn because we just built and just redid, and hopefully we'll have a very successful downtown hotel. But when there was a hotel there that had a higher end restaurant, there's no real high end restaurants, or not a lot of high end restaurant choices around the area. That bring people in, from a broader area that allow people from the marina to get excited because they can come over and have a nicer place to, I think the marina needs some investment. So to me, those things that link those things all together have the biggest appeal. I think things like office buildings, you're going to have parking issues, you're going to have the railroad issues and things like that, but I don't think that's as big of a deal. It never seemed to bother folks before. Now, if the train traffic's up, I was one that stayed at the Valley Inn in Neenah when I moved here many years ago, and they used to have the train run right by there, and if you're on the wrong side of the building, you often knew that you were on that side of the building, but I'm not close enough to know. But when I look at it, I think that kind of a development would be, and again, there's a lot of other options, because then you could have a lot of retail along the rest of the block. You could have other things that that bring people in. You could have, instead of a higher end restaurant, you could have other kind of food places along there, and it becomes kind of a destination within the city. So, yes.
Just a couple of general comments on there. We're not going to move very fast on this for all the reasons we don't control the land, but I think you pointing out brings to mind something else. is that we had a downtown plan at one time. We've accomplished almost everything in that downtown plan. Now we're taking a look at conceivably funding another downtown plan, and we really hadn't talked about much of what that might involve, but your suggestion of including that area in the overall downtown plan is important. And that's really where we have to go now, I think, is going to be coming up with a plan for the downtown area that includes south of the river as well as north of the river, where we want to go next, the next 10-year or 15-year plan. So, and I know beginning to look at ways to maybe finance such a plan as a next step, and that's consistent with where you are.
I think, yeah. I do think that if
And that we
someone,
can do, and we probably should be doing.
and I don't know who the right person is, and maybe it's Alan, because he's about as nice a guy as I've worked with, but I think somebody, and I've worked with some not so nice guys, so don't get the big head. But I think that somebody starting that conversation again with Jeff at Decade and just trying to get a better grip on, I mean, if it's totally off the radar screen, it'd be good for us to know that. I mean, if it's something that whether he's still mad because of the DNR situation that stopped him in his last plans, just kind of knowing where his head is at, to me, is a pretty important piece here.
And really, developing a downtown plan, going back with what Jeff said before, gives a conversation piece to getting in with them. If we develop this plan, what might you see doing with this property that might be
That's a good
consistent
point,
with the
too.
downtown plan? or
Absolutely.
if you want to be involved in part of it, and he may well say no, but at least talking about, okay, we're talking 20 years out, we aren't talking next year. I mean, not 10 years.
We'd let you
15,
do it next
15.
year if you're interested, but, yeah.
But that provides a vehicle.
Yeah,
to
that's
talk
a-
to
that's a
people
very
and
good-
Get him interested, so.
So, Alan, did you have anything else, or Brian, or, yeah? Kim?
I'll just follow up here. There's a couple other things that we're doing right now in the near future. We are still working on that zoning ordinance update and the Riverfront Overlay District. That's still one piece that might play a role in the Pioneer redevelopment. That's still yet to be determined, but I'm sure the Plan Commission, RDA, and the council will see that later this fall. Number two, we did get that grant from East Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission to do a riverfront visioning session. Right now it's scheduled for August with, I think, 2 or 3 different types of events that they're planning, so that we'll get some public input. And then to follow up on the mayor's comment, I'm sure we will be putting together some kind of funding plan for a central city plan that includes the South Shore all the way to Buckstaff, kind of like you guys are describing as well, so that we'll be able to scope that particular project that includes not just the Pioneer, but Buckstaff, the redevelopment of everything over to Main Street, and maybe even a little west of Main Street, because there's a lot of nice commercial properties there at Main Street, and then all the way over to the Geldwin and Marion, just to tie it all together, because we don't really have a plan for that area.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's all we had. Unless there's any other questions, I guess we can close the workshop.
See you. We'll see you. Tom.
Yes.